Illinois has a debt problem, one so big you might call it a debt disaster. The state's unfunded pension and health care liabilities now total $54 billion, the largest in the nation. Yesterday, Governor Pat Quinn signed a public pension reform bill he says will save taxpayers more than $200 billion over 35 years. Problem is, it may not be enough. With us this morning to explore the consequences here is Eden Martin, president of the Civic Committee of the Commercial Club of Chicago, a leading business organization in the city. Eden, why don't we start with this? Why doesn't the governor's bill go far enough in your mind?
Well, there's several reasons. The first place is that the number that you used is wrong. The pension liability at the state level is about $76 billion unfunded today. There's another $40 billion or so of unfunded liability for retiree health care, and then there's another 15 or so of pension bonds and notes. So the total is much closer to $130 billion of unfunded pension liability, retirement-related liability, than it is to the number the governor used.
Eden, is this part of the problem? So is this part of the problem that the state and others just aren't willing to tally up the total amount of money that Illinois is going to owe over the next couple of decades?
Yes, part of it, but not all of it. The biggest part of the problem is that the retirement programs are very generous and that they're not funded. Take another point, the several $100 million of savings that they talked about yesterday. The truth is that we've got a liability in the pension funds of about $130 billion, and the reforms yesterday don't reduce that by a nickel. We've got a budget deficit in Illinois, an annual deficit in the order of magnitude of $14 to $15 billion, if you do the numbers right using accrual accounting. And the reforms yesterday don't reduce that embedded deficit, $14 to $15 billion, by a nickel. So we have a huge fiscal crisis in Illinois, and the reforms yesterday, while they will save costs out into future decades, don't do much to deal with that problem right now.
So it's a step in the right direction, but as you point out, Illinois still has an enormous bill to foot. Illinois taxpayers, though, put governments in office, all the governments that negotiated these agreements with unions. Why shouldn't Illinois taxpayers, the very same ones who voted those people into office, have to foot the bill?
Well, that's a legal question, and it's a very interesting one. The question is, if a pension fund runs out of money, is the state liable for it? Nobody has focused on that very much, but I believe that the best answer, the most likely answer, is probably not. I'm talking about legal liability, not moral liability. Same thing is true at the municipal level in Illinois. And we haven't talked about the municipal pensions. That's another degree of problem that compounds the one at the state level.
So the legal liability question is an open one. What about the moral liability? Do you feel Illinois taxpayers have a moral liability to honor these obligations?
I feel that they have a moral obligation, and I feel that they have an economic obligation, but I also think that the representatives of organized labor have some obligations here. Our proposal is to have reform and proper funding. Reform would reduce the liability, would reduce the current costs, and proper funding. Organized labor's position is, don't worry so much about the reforms, at least as to current employees. Let's just have proper funding. And if they continue on that track, I think the funds will start to run out of money at some point. And unless they are willing to budge, move, accommodate, make compromises with respect to the current costs that we're bearing, I think it may very well happen that the city and the state will disavow the liability, and that will leave a lot of people in terrible situation, which will be unfortunate from everybody's standpoint.
Without question. Eden, if this gets pushed to the brink, somebody's going to have to take a haircut, whether it's the unions and the pensioners or the bondholders. Do you think there's anyone in a position to try and mediate this situation so there's some kind of negotiated settlement?
I don't see it. I would like to be able to answer yes. The optimist in me tries to say yes, but I haven't seen the leadership in either party. And by the way, our organization is a nonpartisan organization. We don't take sides in political fights. And I must say that when you look at the last dozen years or so, there's not much political courage on either side of the aisle here. But I don't see our political structure being able to work out the necessary compromises. The compromise yesterday was a small step in the right direction, but organized labor does not want to permit compromise with respect to current employees, and unless we can do that, we can't reduce that $130 billion of liability, and we can't really reduce today's costs.
Eden, very quickly, with about 15 seconds to go, you represent a commercial club. Are any of your members threatening to move out of state?
I would say no one has threatened to move out of state, but everybody recognizes the reality, which is that if we don't get our arms around these budget problems, people will move out of state.